Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I'm testing something here with the intro of Geek Therapy Radio. This is the first new episode that I've recorded in weeks. I'm sure the podcast listeners are aware that my release schedule has dwindled, and I will tell you why here in a moment. But I'm testing something with the intro, and that is a shorter lead up to my voice coming on, because I've got this theory. I've been working in marketing with the Houston Museum of Natural Science since February of 2021 during that ice storm, that deep freeze we had in Texas. That was my first day. It was a Wednesday, and that was my first day at my new job at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. But I've been in marketing there on the social media team. I've been the YouTube manager and podcast producer for the Houston Museum of Natural Science. That's kind of I guess it could be a little plug there. If you want to know what I've been up to, like if you want to hear more podcasts from me, either me hosting or me co-hosting a podcast, type HMNS into your favorite podcast player, the iHeartRadio app for sure, iTunes or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, all that stuff. Just type in HMNS and subscribe to our handful of podcasts that we have. We have a podcast series on King Tut. We have a podcast series on sharks and the megalodon. I personally host a podcast called Science Bites, which is kind of like shorter, bite-sized nuggets of science. I try to keep them around. I don't really put a time limit. Anything under 15 minutes. So the podcasts on Science Bites are usually probably between 4 minutes and 7 minutes, something like that. Easily digestible, not short, but not too short episodes. So if you want to subscribe to that, just type in Science Bites and or HMNS or Science Bites HMNS into your favorite podcast player, and you can hear more of me. So I don't record Geek Therapy Radio very often. I'm trying to figure out how to do that more often. But if you want to follow up with podcasts that I'm a part of, HMNS in your favorite podcast player. Everybody loves the Houston Museum of Natural Science, and I'm the podcast producer for the Houston Museum of Natural Science. The podcast director is Emma Shkloven. She is just a world-class researcher. These podcasts, other than Science Bites, are so unbelievably well researched. Yes, Science Bites are well researched too, but you'll see if you listen to the episodes series on King Tut, it's called Tut Tut Now What, or you listen to Sharks Tooth Be Told. They are almost entirely written by Emma Shkloven. She is the podcast director. She is the researcher, and you can tell I'm the producer. I edit it and put it all together. I narrate on a lot of it. But yeah, if you want to hear more podcasts that I am a part of, other than Geek Therapy Radio, just type in Houston Museum of Natural Science or just HMNS into your favorite podcast player, and that's how you can hear more podcasts that I am involved with, or that I narrate on, or that I solo on Science Bites. Type Science Bites HMNS into your favorite podcast player. All right, enough plugs. That's kind of one reason why I've been not recording so many Geek Therapy Radio episodes. The other reason, and I can say this in front of the world now, we are in the kind of safer zone, safer time period that I can say this with more reasonable comfort. I'm going to be a daddy again. We are going to welcome son number 2 into the world. He is expected in May of 2024. We have not decided on a name yet, but my first son Riker is very excited. We are thinking of names for son number 2, due in May of 2024. I am very excited, obviously. I'm over the moon. My wife is pregnant again. This is something we planned for. This is something we wanted. It's not a surprise. But every pregnancy is a miracle. I mean, there are billions of babies born, of course, we all know that. But like the odds, if you look at it, if you study conception, every child coming to term and being born is threading an almost impossible mathematical needle. It's one reason why we have not to get too graphic here, but men have so much sperm and women release so many eggs, but men have like millions and billions of sperm per per episode, I should just say. But even the mathematics on that are astronomical that you actually bring a baby to term. So we are having our second child in May of 2024. I'm trying to keep these episodes evergreen, but that's just, I'm recording it in late 2023, expecting a new son. And I'm just thinking, I'm just like, how? Things are going to get hectic. Things are hectic right now. My son turned 3 years old. With one child, it is hectic. With my wife, who, God bless, is struggling with pregnancy number 2 in terms of nausea and health and everything. It's a bit of a challenge right now, and I can only imagine once we add another child with a 4-year-old. Riker will be 4 by the time... No. Riker will be like 3.5 years old or so when the baby number 2 comes along. And just bear with me, y'all. Say a prayer for me. My goodness, send me good vibes, whatever you want to do, whatever you believe or don't believe in. Just be thinking of me next spring when I have 2 children, an infant and a 3.5-year-old. Just bear with me. I'm asking for some slack now in how often I release these podcasts and just keep all these spinning plates spinning. But I am very, very excited for that. There is something I wanted to talk about in this episode. I'll remind you, my email, Johnny, Johnny, at geektherapyradio.com. That's also a plug for geektherapyradio.com, but you can email me directly if you want. Johnny, Johnny, at geektherapyradio.com. Maybe you dads out there or you moms out there kind of, send me your condolences, your excited condolences, your happy condolences that I'm going to have 2 children, 2 boys. We have so much testosterone on the hamburger side of the family tree, and it is not done yet. There's no shortage of heirs to the family name on the hamburger side. In the segments coming up, I want to talk about something, what's been on my mind for weeks and or perhaps months. Not just baby stuff, but, a geek subject. That is DeLorean. DeLorean in its multiple facets. The Clusterf. That is DeLorean. And from an owner's perspective, I've owned my DeLorean since July 2000. What's my kind of perspective on it? That coming up. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. geektherapyradio.com for more information and how to contact me directly. You can also just email me, Johnny, Johnny, at geektherapyradio.com. On all the social media, too. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, even though I don't do much on TikTok, and I really should. Just all the social media. Type in Geek Therapy Radio or Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, and that's how you can follow me. That's also how you find the podcast in your favorite podcast app, like the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio podcast or just Geek Therapy Radio, and you'll see me. Red, white, and black color scheme. That's how you know you got me for sure. Okay, there's something that's been on my mind for the past few weeks, if not months, and I've really been kind of struggling with how I even want to approach it. And I just came to the decision today that maybe I don't need some sort of fleshed out angle to approach this next subject and just speak on it. Maybe just stream of consciousness, talk about it from the heart, raw, with no preconceived notions, nothing written down, nothing kind of like way I want to guide the conversation. I just need to, it's almost like I need to vent to you about something, vent to you about a geek subject. It's not terribly important, but you get what I'm saying. That is the DeLorean Motor Company, or let's just, because it's a cluster F, because it's a quagmire now, let's just call it DeLorean cars in all their different iterations and facets. I thought, and maybe I'll try to get him on in a future episode to maybe get his opinion on it. But I talked to Matt Farah a few times from the Smoking Tire. By the way, y'all should all be subscribed to the Smoking Tire podcast. It's friggin' if you're a car enthusiast, if you're an automotive enthusiast, awesome. Matt Farah is a writer for Motor Trend. He has the Smoking Tire YouTube channel. There's a good chance that probably most of you listening to this radio broadcast or even the podcast have come across Smoking Tire videos across social media or YouTube. Matt Farah is awesome. Sometimes I have to go back and edit some swear words because I don't censor them beforehand. I don't censor anybody, but I will make it ready for FCC airing. So I'll let them say the F-bombs and the S-bombs and whatever they want to say, but I am going to beep it out for the air at least. So anyways, Matt Farah, I wanted to get his opinion on it. I don't have him on the show right now, but I have had him on in the past a handful of times. I want to talk to him since he did own a DeLorean. He's an automotive enthusiast, obviously. He has had a DeLorean in the past. He's a good person to kind of bounce these ideas off of. So I'll work on getting him possibly for a show coming up. But I want to speak to the DeLorean quagmire myself just now. So I guess I'll start off here as an owner. So I've had my DeLorean DMC-12, a 1983 DeLorean DMC-12, and for the window shopper just tuning in, not knowing what they're listening to right now, this is Geek Therapy Radio. The DeLorean is the car that they used in Back to the Future. It has the gull-wing doors, it's stainless steel. There's a whole lot of myth and rumor and just misconceptions about it, but that's the car. It's the car that they used in Back to the Future. It came out a production run of 1981 through 1983. About 4,081s, about 4,082s, and about 783s. So I have a 1983 DeLorean DMC-12, the rarest of all production years. I have had my 1983 DeLorean DMC-12 since July of 2000. For those of you who have lived in the Houston area long enough, there used to be a classic car dealership / museum out in Hempstead off of 290. I don't know if the big car dealership across the street is still there. It was Lawrence Marshall, like Ford, GM. What was it? Lawrence Marshall had a car dealership out there. Lawrence Marshall was a football player, I believe. But he had a car dealership out there in Hempstead off 290, and across the street was Lawrence Marshall, like Antique Cars is what it was called. This was the year 2000, by the way. So they had two DeLoreans there. They had a pristine, like Concours version, museum quality 1981 DeLorean in the showroom, and then they had a 1983 DeLorean out on the lot just rotting and baking in the Texas sun. And that's the DeLorean I bought. It had a big oil spot underneath the front of the car, which I used to my advantage because I wanted people to see it. I counted on their lack of knowledge on the DeLorean in general and myths and whatever. Also, just to think that the engine was leaking oil, but the engine's in the back. Just a V6 engine, not a helicopter engine, nothing. There was so much there still is a lot of misinformation and hype and myth around the DeLorean. Anyways, bought it for in July 2000 for less than $10,000. I'll just say that. Less than a used Honda Civic in July 2000. I put a 35-cent 15-amp engine control fuse in it, and I turned it on and I drove it home. I kind of limped it home. It probably hadn't been started in years, if not months, and I replaced a fuse for less than 50 cents and drove it home. 5-speed manual transmission. I think I probably got it up to like 55 miles an hour on the way home from 290 to Kingwood, Texas at the time. My mom was behind me in the minivan. We both had our hazards on, and I got it home. Just did a little bit to it, and I delivered pizza in it. Got it running nicely, which didn't really take much. It was a tune-up, oil change, whatever, just running it. Really, if I recall correctly, just running the darn thing cleared up a whole lot of the issues, and I delivered pizza in it for Jay Christopher's Pizza and Pasta in Kingwood. Any Kingwood listeners out there? Any North Houston listeners out there? I delivered pizza with it from like 2001 to 2002, 2003 in the DeLorean. That's a whole set of stories in and of itself. But I've had the DeLorean for, it's going to be 23 years It's going to be 24. That's crazy. July 2024, I'm going to have owned the DeLorean for 24 years. Most of its existence, basically. So how does that all tie into the current DeLorean dilemma? So there's basically 3 versions of DeLorean now. There's DMC Classic, there's DeLorean Next Generation, which is run by John DeLorean's daughter, Kat DeLorean, and there is DeLorean, what is it called? It's in San Antonio, the EV, the DeLorean EV, the Alpha 5. So there are 3 DeLoreans. So there's the classic DeLorean, which is what I own. Then there is the DeLorean EV, aka the Alpha 5, that is going to be built, and I say that with huge asterisks, going to be built in San Antonio. And then there is Kat DeLorean's DeLorean Next Generation, which is going to be based on a C8 Corvette, which is actually awesome. When it comes to lineage of DeLorean, here's why it makes sense. Here's why Kat DeLorean's DeLorean Next Generation makes a lot of sense versus the EV DeLorean. There's nobody working on the EV DeLorean that has any remote tie at all to the original DeLorean Motor Company. A matter of fact, the president of the new DeLorean Motor Company working on the EV, what's his last name? Let me look it up. I apologize. I'm going to butcher his name. Just de Vries. He was an executive at Karma. Remember Karma motor cars, the hybrids and the EVs, with the solar panels. He comes from a different car company. No tie to DeLorean Motor Company at all. Which is not, I'm not saying that as a knock necessarily. I'm sure he's very competent and all that, but it's not. There's nothing about the Alpha 5 that has any kind of direct link to the original DeLorean, other than it was kind of a spin-off of DMC, which of itself is not directly linked to DeLorean. It's part of the cluster. It's part of the quagmire. So that's the EV, which really is not, if you look at it, it's not heritage of the DeLorean motor car. It has nothing to do with John DeLorean, nothing about it. So Kat DeLorean with DeLorean Next Generation, building her DeLorean, hopefully, if all goes right, off of a C8 Corvette chassis makes all the sense of the world. And I will continue that thought in the next segment because I see we're coming up to the break here. But basically, for people who remember, John DeLorean got his start at General Motors. He was going to be the vice president of General Motors before he decided to start his own car company and make the DMC-12. John DeLorean invented the GTO. He invented the muscle car. That was John DeLorean at General Motors. So there's a Chevy tie in there that we'll talk about here in a minute. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Let me turn off the window air conditioning unit that I have behind me. It's decided to fire up at the moment. So I was talking about DeLorean in the quagmire that is DeLorean in all iterations right now, and I will get to what it means for me as a longtime owner of a DeLorean. I've owned my 1983 DeLorean since July 2000. I was talking about Kat DeLorean and DeLorean Next Generation, in that at the moment that's kind of the most direct lineage, the most authentic DeLorean idea, I'll call it at the moment, going, because it's Kat DeLorean. It's John DeLorean's daughter who is spearheading this whole thing, and they want to make the new DeLorean based on the C8 Corvette chassis, which is a mid-engine chassis. It is a Chevy/General Motors product, which is where John DeLorean worked and where he was going to be the vice president of before he started his own motor company. John DeLorean invented the GTO. He invented the muscle car. We can argue that back and forth all day long, but he invented the GTO, hence inventing the muscle car. Wasn't it based off a Tempest? It was like a Chevy Tempest or Pontiac Tempest with a big giant V8 motor in it. So anyways, John DeLorean, that's his heritage is very, very tightly bound up in General Motors. So the fact that Kat DeLorean wants to continue the family name of DeLorean motor cars and make a new DeLorean based on a mid-engined Chevy chassis, the Corvette C8 chassis, makes all the sense in the world. That is perfectly in line with what her dad wanted. The original concept for the original DeLorean back when it was first penned to paper in the mid 1970s was for a mid-engined sports car. But then you have the oil embargo, you have the EPA, and everything that was happening in the late 70s, oil crisis, all that. He decided the decision was made to move the engine to a rear-mounted engine over the rear transaxle, and the PRV V6 was not John DeLorean's first choice, but it was an abundant engine in some specs tuned up to over 800 horsepower for Le Mans versions of the PRV V6. It was a the engine itself, the base of the engine itself, the stock engine was a very formidable, very tried and true platform. But after the United States EPA got a hold of it and all the restrictions, in some iterations, it was 800 horsepower. In the DeLorean DMC-12, it was sucked all the way back to like 130 horsepower, 128 horsepower, and 160 foot-pounds of torque, thereabouts. It was absolutely asthmatic, choked by the government, and it was just a terrible time to build and come out with a sports car. John DeLorean, the 1984 DeLorean, was going to be a twin-turbo. It was going to finally output the power John DeLorean, the inventor of the muscle car, had envisioned for it. So the fact that Cat DeLorean wants to continue the legacy of DeLorean and build the next generation DeLorean complete with gull-wing doors on a Chevy Corvette C8 chassis mid-engine with 400 some odd horsepower, close to 500 horsepower, whatever, that is exactly in line with John DeLorean's vision. So Cat DeLorean's DeLorean, the DeLorean Next Generation, is like the most pure lineage, in my opinion, just in my opinion, of the original DeLorean motor car that her father created back in the late 70s and came to production in the early 80s. So that's that. It's actually really cool. At first, when I heard Cat DeLorean wants to build her new DeLorean Next Generation on the chassis of a C8 Corvette, I was like, that gives me vibes of kit car. You know, that gives me vibes of I don't know. It seemed, but at the same time, it more I thought about it, it took me about 2 seconds to think about it. I was like, wait a second, that makes all the sense in the world, actually. It is, as much as I love EVs, I daily drive an EV as a commuter back and forth to work, EV is great. For a sports car, I'm going to want some dinosaurs burning in the engine, or a renewable version of dinosaur juice burning in the engine. And that's what the C8 Corvette is. It's a V8 producing darn near 500 horsepower, if not more, in some iterations. I don't know what the Stingray produces. It might be a little bit more than that. But it's pure. And so the DeLorean on a GM with a V8, please God in heaven, please give it a manual transmission. Please make that an option. For the love of God, please can we have a manual transmission in the next generation DeLorean based on the C8? Oh my gosh. I would probably put in a deposit, at least spiritually, put a deposit down for that version of the DeLorean. So that I'm rooting for Cat DeLorean to actually make the next generation DeLorean come to life, bring it to market. It's way easier said than done. I have about 99% expectation that it will not come to market, and a 1% reality check that it probably will come to market. It's so hard to break into the automotive market. Speaking of that, let's talk about the Alpha 5 from the DeLorean Motor Company. I've gave my piece about that. It's not a truly authentic lineage of DeLorean. DeLorean Motor Company took pre-orders deposits of the Alpha 5 as NFTs. And when they announced that they were going to take deposits in NFTs, basically in exchange for, I don't know what the dollar amount was, $1,000 deposit, whatever, you get in exchange an NFT, a non-fungible transaction or whatever it's called. Basically, you own something digital, you own pixels. The concept was that you would own pixels. It's not real. It's nothing based in reality. It is pure fabrication. It's pixels on a screen, and somehow they say you own it. And the DeLorean Motor Company wasn't the only entity guilty of this. This was part of Bitcoin and the collapse of cryptocurrency, which cryptocurrency hasn't gone away completely. NFTs haven't gone away, but the bubble has popped. And everyone on Earth saw the crypto collapse and NFT collapse coming. Everybody on Earth with their head screwed on straight knew that NFTs and crypto were a bad idea. Bad idea for actual future investment. Terrible. But that's what, at least partly, DeLorean Motor Company did with the Alpha 5. Hey, buy $1,000 deposit on the new Alpha 5 whenever it comes out, and we'll give you to you as an NFT. You'll own this NFT. You'll own these pixels based on nothing, based on a wish, based on nothing. No value in there for real, just based on like faith in a monetary system, which I understand the oxymoron of that, and our whole entire world banking system is based on faith that this dollar bill is actually backed by gold, which it isn't. It's based on nothing. We all have faith in it. Credit's faith. You don't get your paychecks in paycheck form anymore. It all just gets deposited digitally in direct deposit. You never see it die. You can go your whole life now. You can go your whole year without ever touching cash. It is all just in the cloud, so to speak. But not to get too sidetracked, DeLorean Motor Company was taking deposits and offering NFTs for it, and it was just bad news. Bad news. So now there are rumbles, and I don't want you to take... I want you to research this yourself because it's ever changing. Lo and behold, shock to no one, there is trouble in the waters of bringing the new DeLorean Alpha 5 to market. Turns out it's real hard to bring a new electric car to market, bring any car to market. It's very hard. And then when you gave away your deposits as NFTs and it's not based on real money, there's no real money anywhere. People who'd made deposits with NFTs or otherwise are like, hey, when are we going to get a DeLorean Alpha 5? DeLorean Motor Company is saying about that. Stay tuned. It's we're running into issues. There's no way they're going to release on time. Absolutely freaking no way. This is going to be Cybertruck all over again. Remember when Elon Musk announced the Cybertruck in 2019 for purchase in 2022? Do y'all have your Cybertrucks yet? Those of you who made deposits, have you gone to the Tesla store or online to order your Cybertruck yet? Doesn't exist. It's very hard to make an EV, especially such an ambitious EV as Elon Musk is very, very well aware of now. What year is it? 2023, almost 2024? We don't have a 2022 Cybertruck, as was promised in 2019, and that is what's happening to DeLorean Motor Company with the Alpha 5. It's vaporware at this point. There's no idea when it's ever going to come out, if it ever comes out. Turns out it's very hard to do. So Cat DeLorean is up against that challenge with DeLorean Next Generation. DeLorean Motor Company proper is up against that challenge of actually bringing a new EV to market. So there's a third... In this quagmire, there's a third outlier in the whole DeLorean story here, and that is DeLorean DMC Classic. They have just announced, it's really cool, the DeLorean GTO. This takes a DeLorean as we know it, the 1981 through 1983 DeLorean, the classic DeLorean, and does a whole flippin', it's a resto mod is what it is, but it uses original zero-mile crate PRV engines. Remember when I said there are PRV engines that have been tuned up to over close to 900 horsepower and still holds the speed record, straightaway speed record before the chicanes at Le Mans? That same engine has been tuned up. And I love, this is one part of this aspect of the DeLorean GTO that I actually love. I actually love that they keep the PRV V6 engine in there, but they understand the potential of it, they understand the tuning capabilities of it, and they have tuned it up accordingly, which I'll get into a little bit of numbers and speculation in the next segment. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. We've been talking about the DeLorean quagmire. By the way, email me, Johnny, JOHNNY, at geektherapyradio.com, or just visit geektherapyradio.com. You can contact me there also. And all the social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X. I'm on Blue Sky now. Anybody on Blue Sky? It's Geek Therapy Radio Podcast everywhere. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio or Geek Therapy Radio Podcast into anything, including your favorite podcast app, and that'll be me. You can subscribe, you can follow me, see what I'm doing, da-da-da-da-da. Geek Therapy Radio or Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, type in whatever into Googler or whatever app you're using, and I'll come up there. So the DeLorean quagmire, and I need to get to my personal kind of what this means for me as an owner here in this segment, because it's the fourth segment, and we're going to wrap it up soon. So the DeLorean GTO is the third player in this game. So we have Kat DeLorean with DeLorean Next Generation with her C8 Corvette-based DeLorean project. Then you have DeLorean Motor Company making the Alpha 5 EV DeLorean. Giant question mark as to whether or not that'll come out, and giant question mark if Kat DeLorean's DeLorean will ever come out. The third player in this DeLorean game, capitalizing on this about to pop bubble of hype, in my prediction, DeLorean hype, is the DeLorean GTO from DeLorean Motor Company Classic, or DeLorean Classic or Classic DMC, however you want to call it. It's just a mess. It's a mess of DeLorean companies right now. It's a freaking mess of DeLorean companies. But the DeLorean GTO, one of my favorite parts about it is that it's going to use this has the most kind of promise of something actually being delivered to customers at some point, versus the EV versus the C8 Corvette-based DeLorean, which looks awesome, by the way. The Kat DeLorean's DeLorean Next Generation C8 Corvette version of the DeLorean looks, I almost said the F word straight up, looks freaking amazing. It looks awesome. It looks so much better than the Alpha 5, in my opinion. Nothing looks better than the original DeLorean DMC-12, though, and that's what the DeLorean GTO is. The DeLorean GTO, here's the big spec that matters, the engine. My favorite part about it is it uses the PRV V6, and a lot of you just joining the show right now might be like, that engine was a dog, blah, blah, blah. I'll just reiterate that that PRV V6 has been used in millions of vehicles from all sorts of different manufacturers and has been tuned upwards of 900 horsepower and still holds the speed record at pre-chicane Le Mans. So, DeLorean Motor DMC Classic understands that the PRV is a bulletproof engine, that it can be tuned to whatever you want it, so they are supercharging it, just like John DeLorean envisioned. They're supercharging it to 350 horsepower, which, let me remind you, the DeLorean DMC-12 weighs about 2,900 pounds. It weighs the same amount as the Subaru BRZ, Toyota GT86, or the Scion, the defunct Scion FRS. That's a very common car you see out there from Toyotas. Suzuki has their version. It's a very popular sports car. It weighs the same amount. The DeLorean DMC-12 weighs less than 3,000 pounds. It wasn't a heavy car. It just, the engine was underpowered for what it was in original spec. I've always said, and I may have said it on Geek Therapy Radio before, in my opinion, having been in DeLoreans that have been supercharged in stage 3 and all that kind of stuff, that about 350 horsepower is the perfect number, the absolute perfect number in a DeLorean. That brings 0 to 60 to, oh Lord, between 3 and 5 seconds, 4 seconds, maybe a little less than 4 seconds. The transmission that's about the upper limits of what the Renault transmission can handle anyway. I'm sure that the DeLorean GTO transmission has been bolstered, has been strengthened, but the engine is 350 horsepower from the PRV V6. It's a supercharged PRV V6, 350 horsepower. Of course, there's upgraded suspension. I mentioned this is kind of a resto mod kind of situation. The suspension is upgraded not only to cure handling issues, but also handle the power of the engine. I'm sure that the transmission has been bolstered. The interior has been, in my opinion, reasonably tastefully kept, kind of with original vibes, I would say, but it's digital dash, which I'd be okay if they kept the dash analog, but it's 2023. What are you going to do? Resto mod, right? So the dash is digital. So you have rear view cameras, you have Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, all that good stuff. It's just every modern amenity of a modern car. It's just you're driving a DeLorean. The bones of it are DeLorean. The bones of DeLorean weren't bad to begin with. They weren't terrible to begin with. It was an X-frame chassis from Lotus, the same chassis as the early 80s Lotus Esprits. They were brother and sister vehicles. It needed a little bit of reinforcement on the sway bar up front. You can put a bar between the tops of the struts and get more rigidity out of it. I'm sure that the DeLorean GTO addresses all these issues. I'm not a massive fan. Maybe I'll put it as a thumbnail of this podcast. I'm not a massive fan of the piano black body trim aerodynamics of the car. Not a huge fan of that. I wish they would have kept the exterior a little bit more modern. I'm not personally, in my opinion, a huge fan of the bigger wheels, although I understand it. The bigger wheels look like DeLorean wheels. They're the I don't know how you call it, the spokey rims. They're bigger to handle. They handle better, handle the engine power better, handle the handling better. So I understand why the tires are bigger. The original car had 15s in the back and 14s up front. And so to any younger person listening to this right now, just because you have 15-inch rims on the back, the tires were massive. In fact, the rear tires on the DeLorean, what is it, 15... What are the dimensions? They're small truck tires. They're big, fat, wide radials. They're massive tires. Just because the rim is small doesn't mean that the whole wheel is small. You put giant tires back there because that's where the engine is and everything like that. And then up front, you have the smaller tires. It makes all the sense in the world. You look at it, it's visually appealing. Smaller tires up front, big, giant, fat tires on the back. Awesome looking. So the DeLorean GTO has rims that are much bigger. I don't know if they match in diameter front to back. From looking at it, it looks like they kind of do. Maybe it's like 20s in the back and 19s in the front, something like that. But they're much bigger. They're modern-looking rims with fat and skinny tires on it. I don't think it helps the aesthetic, in my personal opinion. I wish, they could have kept it a little smaller, a little more original, but I get it completely. The tires, especially in the rear of an original DeLorean, you can get them easily. You go to TireRack.com and get them all day long, but they're not a ton of options, and they're not a ton of manufacturers. It's not an extremely common tire size to get anymore. So I understand going with a little bit more common tire size, rim size. I get it. It just doesn't look as great to me. But the fact that they are keeping the DeLorean running on dinosaur juice or renewable dinosaur juice, whatever you want to put in there, is cool. It's kind of saving. It's a muscle car by every stretch of the imagination. It's a supercharged V6 now with manual transmissions or automatic transmissions, but you can still get a DeLorean with, pardon my French, kick-ass power, 350 horsepower, DeLorean GTO. Awesome. I'm going to try my darndest to do a review of one or do a ride along in one. Of all three, I can take or leave the Alpha 5 EV. I thought I'd care about it more, but I don't actually. I really hope and wish all the luck in the world. Maybe I will try to have Kat DeLorean on the show to talk about it, but I wish her all the luck in the world in bringing the DeLorean Next Generation to market based on the C8 Corvette. But I also like that the classic DeLorean Motor Company is offering the DMC GTO with 350 supercharged horsepower from the original engine. I think that's awesome. I think that's really cool. What it means for me as an owner now, all the DeLorean hubbub and fluff, is that DMC Classic is so big in the britches that it's hard for me to get simple work done on it. I would like to restore my car, but the lead time is so far out because they're so busy with things that me as an owner, it's hard to get DMC Classic to service my vehicle anymore. I'll have to double check on that, but anyways, it's just kind of made things difficult for original owners now in my experience thus far. So it's cool, all the hype about DeLorean, that there's 3 different DeLorean cars now hoping to come out, and it's like, well, I've got an original, and I just want the freaking the clutch cylinder fixed. But it's hard to do. Anyways, that's the end of the show. You are worthy of love. I say this every episode. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love. You are worthy of receiving love. And listen to me, you are worthy of your own self-respect. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to y'all later. Take care.